Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for part 2 of the June 2022 Q&A series. Part 1's on the channel now, so if you want the first half of the questions that we answered, go check that out. We've already covered a lot of great questions, but part 2, more questions to cover. But before we get into them,
today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. When will AMD and Nvidia stop relying on the used market as an excuse to not release a competent sub-$200 GPUs? Are they actually using that as an excuse, the used market? Have they... It's a lie
I'm
if
not
they
sure.
are.
Well, they don't want used GPUs to be sold because a used GPU gets them no money.
No.
So they'd rather you buy their crappiest, lowest end GPU.
Yeah, they want you to... AMD wants you to buy the 6500 XT and pretend that you can't get like an RX 580 or a GTX 1650.
For like $50 less than the actual cost of the
or
car.
even the same price,
Yeah.
but technically it's a better product. It certainly is, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't know if they've used that for an excuse, so I can't say they have because I haven't seen that happen. But if they are lying because they 100% want to generate a new sale because that puts more money in their pocket, even if they're only making a small profit margin. We've talked about this time and time again. You know, they don't want to neglect. There's all this hoo-ha about them neglecting the $200 US price point. They have no interest in neglecting that price point. If that's where the bulk of the market still is, and that's where the mainstream is, they'll want to service that mainstream audience. They'll want to cash in on them. The problem is those people are being forced to go up to the $300 bracket or more because they were getting outbidded essentially by cryptocurrency miners. That's no longer happening. As we've spoke of, the GPU market has seen a huge price correction. It's seen a massive cooling off. There's nowhere near the demand. Lots of cards are sitting on shelves now, even at drastically reduced prices compared to what we were seeing only months ago. So whether that can happen for the next generation, I doubt it. I think the next generation we're going to see it become much more competitive. And then if we don't see other external factors affect the following generation, then I think we could see prices continue to correct further, or at least the direction we would like to see them trend in.
Yeah, the reason why we don't see products in the $200 market is that it's not just being outbid by cryptocurrency miners, it's Nvidia and AMD want to encourage you to spend as much money as they possibly can, which is why they always release the highest end cards first. They always make you wait until the mainstream cards come out because there's no reason they can't just launch them at the same time or even first. No technical reason whatsoever. They could just do that. And why often some of the lowest tier cards appear to be the worst in terms of features, in terms of value often. Often it's the tier above the lowest tier that's the best value. That's another trick to encourage you. For example, instead of buying a 6500 XT, you buy a 6600. Instead of buying a 3050, you buy a 3060. Or they've now got the GTX 1630, right? Like instead of buying that, you buy the next tier up. So all these companies are trying to encourage you throughout the release cycle into spending more money. So eventually it comes down to the point where they've done all the tactics they can. They've released it late, they've made you wait ages, they've given you all the incentives that you can to buy a high-end card, and then you're just refusing to spend more money. As a buyer, you're firmly wedded to the $200 price tier, and then finally they're like, well, for those buyers, it's either the $200 card or nothing, so we should probably offer a $200 card. And that's how the market goes for the low end. I would love to see a different scenario where companies care about people who only have $200 to spend and are entry-level gamers, but they simply don't care. They care about money, they care about profits and shareholders, which is the case for every single company. This is not this isn't some news to people, hopefully. They don't care about you as a consumer, they care about their money, and so all their decisions are based around that.
Yeah, so instead of fighting over who's better, AMD or Nvidia, if gamers could I'm talking about a fantasy land here that is absolutely not true or possible or going to happen. But if gamers could unite and go, no, the majority of us, the bulk of us, we are only going to pay $200 US for a GPU. AMD and NVIDIA, it's on either of you to produce the best product at that price point, and you get our money. And then you will see them heavily compete to make the best product they can while still making a profit.
Yep. And
then you'll get a great $200 card. But while that's not the majority of gamers, while the majority of gamers are like, well, I can probably justify spending $300 or $400, that's the situation. Yep. But as I said, I think with less demand from cryptocurrency miners,
it opens up new possibilities.
Yeah, I think obviously we're already seeing a cooling off and a price correction. Whether we'll get like really great value $200 cards is in the future is yet to be seen, but it will certainly improve to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, obviously one issue with this current generation has been the supply situation. If people are still buying cards at every high price point, and there's only a limited amount of cards that can be made, then they've got a big incentive to, instead of selling a $200 GPU, to sell a $1,000 GPU because they can make a lot more money from doing that. But obviously, fingers crossed, next generation, supply won't be as much of an issue. So then, again, like we're talking about, they can produce those cards when it comes to the point where people will stop buying the high-end cards.
It's funny how it's worked out, because for so long AMD hasn't been competitive beyond the mid-range. And people, myself included, have been thinking, wow, it'd be so great when AMD gets their act together and they can create a 5700 XT type product that competes at the high end, so a 2080 Ti competitor for that generation. That will get the GPU pricing wars going. They'll be, no. Because of other reasons, but also it seems like AMD and NVIDIA have sort of done a gentleman's agreement where they're like, well, we'll both just push prices high and may the best man win type deal. Whereas AMD hasn't gone, we can make a 6800 XT that's sort of an RTX 3080 competitor, and we're going to do it for $100 less.
But I think what we've seen,
or even more.
I think what we would have seen this generation if availability wasn't as ridiculous as it was, I think a lot of AMD's cards at the price that they set wouldn't have been very competitive. And I think they would have had to drop pricing, because if you could walk into a store and buy an RTX 3070 for $500 or a 6700 XT for $480, I reckon a significant percentage are buying the 3070 at that price point. So I think they would have had to have done something there, especially when the 3060 Ti was $400.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we'll never know.
We'll never know.
But I think you're right.
But I think I think there will be more competition next generation.
Well,
at least I'm hoping so.
We'll certainly have our answer. You can go and watch Hub clips in a year or so and see if Tim was right that would have happened for this generation had it not been for cryptocurrency mining and a few other factors. Anyway, probably answered that one, so we'll move on.
Next up, we're going to be answering two questions at the same time, because both of these things are related, and I think they've come up a fair bit since AMD announced their Zen 4 CPUs, or teased them, or whatever you want to call it, a couple of months ago. Sandbagged them a couple of months ago. So the first question is, do you think AMD will migrate some of their AM4 chips to AM5? And the second question is, do you think we'll see any lower-end Zen 4 CPUs come to AM4? So
hang on.
These two questions are asking...
What was the second one? Any Zen
4 coming to AM4. So going back...
They can't... Okay, yep. Okay.
And then the current gen parts moving up to the new socket. So
that's... Okay.
So will these things... Or at least the questions are asking, do you think these things will happen?
No.
I think no to both.
I think no to both. So the main reason why that's difficult, apart from the fact that it's an entirely different socket, different pin layout, basically a complete redesign of how it interfaces with the socket, the motherboard, is the fact that it's completely different integrated memory controllers as well. One supports DDR4 only, one supports DDR5 only. So would they do a Zen 5 IMC redesign to support DDR4, which is obviously very complicated and not worth doing because they would have done it initially anyway, like Intel did with Alder Lake. As for bringing 7nm Zen 3 chips to the AM5 socket, I get where you're at for like supply and demand and being able to run those two nodes simultaneously. sort of like what we've suggested they do with GPUs in the past. But again, the redesign that's required there, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, both of these examples require the CPU itself to be redesigned.
Yep.
To change the memory controller. And yeah, even if, let's say, for example, that for Zen 4, they decide to bring it to AM4, but not change the memory controller, so they keep it DDR5 only, then they bring up the situation where they're making it on an AM4 socket, but you need a new DDR5 AM4 motherboard, which is just pointless.
Yeah,
like,
probably can't even do it anyway.
you probably can't do it. It would just be pointless. And again, the other way around.
Well, at that point, you'd be like, why did we need a new socket?
Yeah, and obviously for bringing the AM4 chips to AM5, again, the only way that could ever work is making AM5 boards that have DDR4 support, which is like, why do that?
I get the idea, though. I get the idea.
Yeah,
because you can flood the new platform with affordable CPUs.
Yeah.
Because they did that with, what was it, the 12900? God, I forget now, but it was terrible. They released that on the AM4 platform back with first gen Ryzen, the original. It was like everyone was hanging out for the new APUs, and they gave us that as like it was only 6 months or something before we got the 2200G and 2400G, if I recall correctly. Anyway, that was terrible, and I wish they didn't do it.
Yeah, so I think this is just simply too complicated and doesn't really make much sense. The only way that we'll ever see a cross-generation thing is if they decide to make a new CPU. So, it's possible that a future CPU would be like a Zen 2 architecture on 7 nanometer, but upgraded with a variety of new features. And they're using 7 nanometer because they've got excess supply or something. That's possible, but it's not going to be bringing the 5600 that we know of today directly across.
Yeah.
That's just not going to happen, basically. It would have to require an IO die change. Maybe they'll do something like that, but I wouldn't imagine it's a high priority for them.
No.
Yes, I think it's probably going to focus on their 5 nanometer products as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, you think so. Anything's possible, I suppose, with the chiplet designs and whatnot, but yeah.
We'll see.
Okay, what is your current opinion on DDR5? There are certainly throughput advantages to DDR5, but timings are still a bit loose at reasonable prices. Do you have any insights on when this might normalize and be more on par with DDR4? For example, DDR5 6400 CL28 or DDR5 7200 CL32. I think that kind of memory will always be sold at a premium, like we see with like Samsung B-Die DDR4 memory, for example. That was never like great value memory for most people. So for DDR5 to become competitive with sort of the DDR4 memory that we're seeing now, I don't think it'll be that long, because we still don't have an exclusive DDR5 mainstream platform yet. So we'll be getting that in Zen 4. So I think it'll be quite telling with Zen 4. Obviously, we'll be getting flagship parts, and then when we filter down and get the more affordable, like $200-ish CPUs, that will almost guarantee that'll coincide with affordable quality DDR5 memory. But generally, these memory standards, they take what, like a year or 2 years generally to sort of really... Yeah, I think it was quite a few years with even DDR4 before we got you could regularly get a good quality kit for a sort of a bargain basement price. So yeah, hopefully sometime next year. But no insights on that one. I can't predict the future. I think we predicted when Alder Lake first arrived that by about this point, DDR5 memory would start getting more reasonable, and it certainly has been continuing to drop in price. So yeah, hopefully soon. All right, Tim, what questions do you and myself get asked regularly that we find the most annoying? And no, we won't accept "it depends" as the answer. I don't really find any questions particularly annoying. I like seeing all the different questions we get asked. I suppose any that are really obvious, like we just can't answer that, like what is the exact performance of the RTX 4090 going to be, or something like that, or how do you think it'll perform? I don't find, it's annoying in the sense that I can't really give you an answer, but I don't find that annoying because I know that you guys are super excited to learn about that stuff, and you think maybe we have some inside knowledge that we can give you, but almost always not the case. Maybe people asking about like their specific use case.
Like if they're specific setup to a very specific upgrade.
Yeah, but even that I understand. I think maybe the only one that gets annoying is if it's a reoccurring, something we've answered over and over and over again, like almost every Q&A. And we're kind of like, no, we're done answering that, which we have said before. We're like, we've answered this one, maybe 4 times over the last 6 months. But again, I don't really get annoyed by that. So I don't think there's anything that really annoys me.
I think it's only like spam where sometimes you see one commenter or one person repeating the same question, on let's say 5 of our videos. So they'll just go through, they'll find the latest 5 videos and ask the same question on all 5. I mean, that's kind of annoying. It's like, ask the question once instead of spamming it. But yeah, I mean...
But that's it. I love their enthusiasm.
Well, I think in general, I really appreciate the questions because it shows you guys are engaged in the content and that you're coming away and you're still wanting to learn more, which is good. You should always try and be inquisitive.
Pretty much how we've built the channel.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the benchmark, I'd say the vast majority of the benchmark comparisons and the extra content we do has come about because of you guys in the comments saying, can you test this? And then it gets like 50, 60, 70 upvotes. We're like, well, guess that's what I'm doing next week. Thanks for sorting that out for us. So yeah, we largely appreciate the comments. They're really good. All right, I think we'll have a bit of a back and forth on this one because this is what is your opinion? So it can be whatever.
People love our opinions.
Whatever. Well, I'm glad that that was the impression I was getting. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, what is the oldest usable hardware? And there's 3 options here, so we'll just start with one.
Yep.
So the oldest usable hardware for AAA gaming, and again, this is subjective. It's opinion based because I guess like for me, usable for like competitive multiplayer titles is like 90 FPS is what I consider the minimum. For me, the minimum for single player is like 45. Ideally, I'd want to be shooting more towards 60 though. CPU that will allow you to do that. And was this CPU and GPU or was it just CPU?
Just hardware in general. Hardware.
So I think we'll start with CPUs. GPUs gets really tricky. I think the minimum for AAAs is sort of like a 6-core, 12-thread Intel CPU. I know people will point to like the 4-core, 8-thread stuff, but I think that's more for the number 2 part, the mainstream. So I think for AAA, the latest and greatest demanding stuff, I think you really want a 6-core, 12-thread Intel CPU.
From what generation?
Like
because
the 8th generation, obviously, because that's when they were introduced right on the desktop. And then like a 6-core, 12-thread Zen 2 onwards CPU maybe?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about oldest usable hardware. I certainly think Zen 2 is still very usable.
Yeah.
So from that perspective,
but a 6 cores, I don't know so much about like, the Ryzen 3 3100, 3300X. They're probably usable, but they're more mainstream usable. I think if you want...
Yeah. And I think first generation Ryzen as well, you're probably looking at an upgrade to get...
Yeah, and again, I'm wanting to push like around 90 FPS in modern games. So I think Zen 2, and then mainstream stuff, look, sure, you could definitely go down to the quad cores with 8 threads from Intel. Like the 7700K, 6700K.
Like if you're just targeting 60 FPS, there's a lot of CPUs that are going to be capable of that.
Yeah, and then again, first generation Ryzen 5, 1600, still very capable. Maybe even the quad cores, but not as confident.
What about GPUs? For AAA gaming, what's still acceptable? I think we can safely go back to the Pascal era, but the question is GPU for AAA gaming? Is a GTX 1060 still suitable for AAA gaming? I'd probably say no.
No.
No,
that'd be mainstream.
You'd probably want at least like a 1080 or 1080 Ti.
I think so.
It's probably around the level. Whereas the 1060 is still okay for mainstream gaming.
Yeah.
And I guess again, it depends whether for AAA gaming you're talking, do you want a high frame rate at a low quality setting, or are you acceptable with like a low
AAA
FPS?
These days, 1440p, again, the sort of 90-ish FPS. So not 60 hertz, just above 60 hertz, which, you start getting towards 100 FPS. Like I said, 1440p. And that is sort of like the 5700 XT, Radeon RX 5700 XT levels of performance, which is essentially a GTX 1080 Ti, which is essentially like a 2060 Super to 2070. That kind of range of performance, I think.
But I think again, it depends what level of quality settings you're.
Sure.
Because you could go down to medium on a lower tier
Well,
card.
if you're playing Fortnite using competitive settings, you can use a GTX 1060.
But
so that's where these questions become really muddled because people will be playing, Overwatch.
Yeah.
And you don't really need the world's most powerful GPU for playing Overwatch. So it depends. Are we talking about Overwatch? Or are we talking about Warzone maxed out with ray tracing, which is kind of dumb? But
But I think for oldest, the way I'd think of oldest usable hardware would be like, what could play most games today in the AAA category at sort of like not junk tier quality.
It's your opinion anyway, so it can't be wrong.
So, well, yes, effectively, yes.
You can disagree, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's your opinion.
Because, I think for mainstream gaming, something like an RX 570 / GTX 1060 is probably where the minimum is today. I think if you're running a card below that, like a 1050 or obviously previous gen cards, there's probably... I guess when it gets to the point where games literally cannot be played because the GPU is too old, even something like a 6500.
How do we both go to that straight away?
I was just thinking of can you play Cyberpunk on a 6500 XT? It's
not really.
Pretty dicey.
Yeah, the lowest possible settings you can't hit 60 FPS.
And I think a GTX 1060 would struggle with that game too. So
yep, does. Same with RX 580. So
those are probably a mainstream option, and a higher end option would be like a 1080 or something.
Yeah, because during the height of the cryptocurrency boom, like a year ago, I looked at RX 580s, how usable. I think I even did the GTX 1060. And for the vast majority of games, 1080p medium, really playable, really great performance. But then you get to the latest and greatest cutting titles, Cyberpunk being a great example, not really playable, even at 1080p using the lowest quality settings. So...
yeah, and I think that's the point where you're looking at upgrade. If you can't play the game's a game that you're interested in comes out, you can't play it, your hardware's no longer usable.
Yeah, that's right, and that's your sort of your perspective.
Yeah, I guess
for someone who's still playing Doom, they're probably going to 200 FPS on the RX 580 at medium settings. There was a third one. What was the third again?
The third one was for Office work plus web browsing.
Yeah, Celeron 6900. Honestly, you can use basically anything for running Windows, light Office tasks, web browsing, email, anything that's modern.
Yep,
will work just fine. All right, Tim, what's the most fun you've had with PC or general tech in the last year? The most fun.
In the last year. So what has actually come out in the last year? Not much. Because the cutoff is June 2021, we've had mostly refreshed products from most of the product lines that we cover on the channel. So things like
it doesn't have to
GPUs.
be just products. It can be anything.
PC related though.
Sure. Well, for me, for example, the most fun I've had PC related this year would be building Matt's new gaming computer live on the channel. Despite the fact that we had endless hurdles, that kind of made it funny and fun, all the problems we had with that build. What else? I really enjoyed my streaming PC build with Chris. That was a lot of fun. Normally I don't like the builds that much, but I guess having people like Matt come back and having Chris join us, that was a lot of fun. And tech-related stuff, I've really enjoyed learning about streaming and getting into streaming and doing some game streaming, playing with the Patreon members. That's been a lot of fun. That's tech-related. So really, this year, I would say what I've had the most fun doing is very different to previous years. It's been building PCs, predominantly gaming PCs, and then actually gaming.
Had a bit of time for that lately, which has been good.
Yeah. So I think that's what I've had the most fun doing is actually gaming.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess I've been doing a normal amount of gaming. Haven't been building too many PCs because my current PC is perfectly fine. So I think, it's probably more on the testing side of things, mostly for stuff like monitors. I think the other stuff that I've been testing, things like FSR 2.0 have been reasonably exciting to test just because they're a new technology. And I think we've talked many times on these Q&As in the past about how, when the latest and greatest new tech comes out, that tends to be the more exciting content that's made throughout the year.
Yeah. So
testing things like that, I think things like the QD OLED Alienware monitor were pretty exciting to take a thorough look at. Yeah. Which has probably been,
I think in a few months, your most exciting thing of the year, tech-related, will be setting up your new studio.
Yeah, setting up the new studio. Obviously, that's kind of in process at the moment.
It's not so much fun right now.
Not a lot of... Yeah, it's been good to see the progress and everything. Yeah. But as far as it being fun...
Not so much.
Not so much. Setting up the Monitors Unboxed channel has been a bit of fun as well. Yeah. So... I've enjoyed sort of seeing that channel grow. It's kind of like starting a whole new project there, which is very interesting. So it's been going quite well. So I think though I would say that the upcoming year, starting from now into a year from now, there will be a lot more interesting things that will get me very excited about tech as opposed to the previous year that we've just had. Next question. Now that prices on CPUs and GPUs are reasonable, should we buy now or wait for the new generation?
So we've sort of answered this recently.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about this in my pricing update videos where, at least in my opinion, I think if you're buying a high-end GPU, now is the time to wait. I don't see a lot of value spending $800-900 on products like an RTX 3080 when very likely those cards will be replaced by the end of this year with something faster. We don't know what the price of those cards is going to be like, but when new cards come out, it will affect the pricing of old cards, which is one aspect to consider.
Yeah, given how much of a slowdown we've seen in the demand, and
yes,
I think that doesn't bode well for AMD and NVIDIA to jack prices sky high. I think they're going to have to come out with reasonable performance gains at reasonable prices. They can't go silly with it. We're not expecting cryptocurrency to bounce back and cause dramas for us anytime soon. So it may not be as doom and gloom as we thought for the next gen. But of course, we'll have to wait and see. There'll still be a flurry for the initial release. But how quickly the demand cools off will be interesting to see.
And I think it could be even worth, if you were interested in a product like an RTX 3080, just waiting until the next gen cards are announced, because that's when you start to see retailers panicking about how we've got all these cards. How do we sell them? So you start seeing prices fall.
The 2080 Ti Exodus.
Yeah. So back when the 3070 was announced, people were flogging off their 2080 Ti's on eBay for like $500.
Yeah, or less.
And then a year later, they're well over $1,000 used. So there's a lot of opportunities there for high-end buyers. But I think if you're more interested in a mid-tier product,
mid
like
to low,
sort of $400 price tier and below, so looking at your 3060s, 6600 XT type products, we've seen each generation get longer and longer, the time between the high-end cards being launched and the mid-range and mainstream cards being launched. And I think that cadence will very much also be the case for the next generation.
Yeah, less of a gamble as well.
So I think, if it comes to the point where we're waiting a year to get an RTX 4060 type product for hopefully around the $300 mark, you're probably just best off buying now. Because if you're waiting, that's a year of gaming on your new GPU that you're not getting, and we don't know what the performance increases are like in that.
It's so hard to put a price tag, a value on that, being able to game and enjoy games for 12 months opposed to, not being able to.
Yeah. And, obviously all the rumors are discussing doubling the performance of some cards in the lineup. But again, over the years, not only has the release time taken longer for mainstream cards, but the performance gains, for that price tier have been a lot lower than what we've seen for higher tier cards. With higher tier buys, you spend $800, you get big gains over your last $800 card. You spend $300, maybe you get 20%. So if that's the case again, you'd be better off buying a GPU now and enjoying, your card for the time span of a year. But we're talking future predictions. It's obviously very hard to know what these companies are doing, but I think that's kind of where I'd be
prediction
going.
For sure. All right. Is the TR4 socket and HEDT in general dead? Will we ever see Zen 4/Zen 5 and Threadripper? Yeah, almost certain we'll see Zen 4 Threadripper.
They've announced a Threadripper 7000 series product in one of their roadmaps for AMD, so I'm sure we can put that on the screen. We'll show the roadmap, but basically, yes, it will be coming. Now, whether or not that's OEM only or not is another question, because we've seen with the Threadripper 5000 Pro series that's only just starting to become like a available product for people, whereas it launched many months ago for OEM systems exclusive to certain workstation systems. So
again, that was that ties in with the disaster that has been the last few years as well.
Supply issues, I mean, these are going to be very expensive CPUs. So
I mean, Zen 2 based Threadripper was extremely expensive.
So I think we will see it. I think AMD sort of deprioritized it. It's sort of like the least in a supply crunch, it's kind of the least important product to get out to people.
It's certainly a niche platform.
Yeah, because people that really needed like a Zen 3 part with 64 cores could have bought a server. Like it was still, you could have got it, in sort of a slightly different manner if you really needed, and you would have had to pay a premium, obviously. Whereas hopefully next generation with better supply, we'll see that part actually come. But the fact that they've put it on a roadmap, whereas I don't think Threadripper 5000 ever officially appeared in a roadmap, at least up until basically when it was announced. I think that gives us a bit more of an idea that, yeah, it's probably will be coming. Of course, the TR4 socket, they'll probably need to change, but the rest of it, fingers crossed.
Okay, would you mind giving a status update of gaming in Windows 11 for mid-2022? Specifically, if I'm running Ryzen and RDNA 2, is there any reason to upgrade from Windows 10? Also, are there still negative effects for AMD products like we saw near launch? So I think you're talking about the L3 cache bug. That was solved pretty quickly. I think by the time I tested Windows 11, there was actually a small performance advantage for Ryzen users to go to Windows 11. So maybe go back and check that video. The upgrade's not really that necessary, let's be honest. Windows 10, Windows 11, pretty similar in terms of performance. I would only do the upgrade when it suits, when you're sort of ready to do it. If it happens that, I need to reinstall Windows or I'd like to do a fresh install, then yeah. And I would recommend doing a fresh install, mind you, especially for Ryzen users. Don't do a sort of Windows 10 to Windows 11 upgrade. Do a fresh install. You will ensure that you get maximum performance there. But I think otherwise, yeah, Windows 11's pretty well sorted at this point in time. I held off updating our editing rigs because we had a couple of issues with Adobe Premiere. I'm not sure if they're solved now. Adobe Premiere has problems every other update though, so that's not necessarily a knock on Windows 11. It just happened that the new bug that Adobe had come up with didn't affect Windows 10, but it affected Windows 11. So we thought,
Classic Adobe.
Yeah. So yeah, for gamers, yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to upgrade, but at the same time, there's no real advantage to doing so.
Yeah, there's no major feature. I mean, things like Windows 11 handles HDR slightly better, so if you're rich and you have an HDR panel that's worth using, then it's like, maybe. But apart from that, it's not like there's the bonus performance mode.
No.
So...
No, but
yeah.
you won't know... There is a performance difference for fresh install versus fresh install, but it's so minuscule that it won't be perceived while gaming.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't updated my workstation yet either because... you need to go through and make sure all of the apps work, and there's all sorts of specific things that I need running on there, but
exactly.
I'll get around to it eventually, and probably will do a fresh install just to...
Yeah, I'm still on Windows 10 for my work PC. We upgraded because we got a new video editor in February, Balin, who's just on our Patreon live stream. You can see him in some BTS content as well. Anyway, and he plays games with me on Friday nights. Another plug there for my gaming on Friday nights. But we upgraded we built him a brand new editing PC in February, put Windows 11 on that, and that's where we ran into the various issues that his computer wouldn't work. But then if we loaded the same project up on my Windows 10 PC, it worked fine. We ended up formatting, reinstalling Windows 10, and it worked fine. But that's a Premiere
That's probably Premiere's fault.
That's a Premiere thing.
That's definitely, like, I'm 99% sure that's Adobe's fault. But yeah.
Yep, definitely.
One's also related to what we were just talking about. AMD has repeatedly said that they will still support AM4 and have it coexist, presumably as a budget option, alongside AM5. What is your opinion on a potential split in sockets with a budget DDR4 socket and a more premium DDR5 socket, as opposed to what Intel is doing, supporting both budget DDR4 and higher-end DDR5 on the same socket? Well, I think straight away it's like, yes, Intel uses the same socket for DDR4 and DDR5, but it's still two different motherboards. So they could have had two different sockets. Like, obviously you can slot the CPU into either one, which is the advantage, but from a motherboard perspective, they're not compatible with one another.
No, it's still...
You choose one or the other.
Yeah, it's still much more flexible than what's being suggested, though.
Yeah, I guess you can upgrade your 12th gen part from DDR4 to DDR5.
With a motherboard change, because otherwise you'd need a new CPU as well. It's not happening, so...
Yeah, but I guess what's your opinion on AM4 coexisting for budget DDR4 options?
Well, yeah... what do you mean by coexisting? Do you mean what we have right now will continue to sell, which I think is going to happen?
Probably.
I mean, that's essentially what AMD's said. At the very least, they'll continue supporting those platforms with newer GSA microcode to address any say USB problems or security concerns or anything like that. So it'll definitely coexist in that sense. Whether we'll see updated new CPUs or whatever for AM4, I'm not expecting that.
No.
But again, anything's possible. That's not my expectation. It's just that they're supporting that CPU, that platform into the future. It'll coexist with AM5. It won't be end of life, discontinued.
Yeah.
So you should be able to buy those CPUs, those motherboards as you can today, some period into the future, and it'll be supported. But I don't think there'll be any sort of mingling between the two or anything like that. And I don't think there'll be any new AM4 CPUs.
Yeah, and I think AMD's already at least pointed towards, some AM5 CPUs being more budget oriented, because they are going to be releasing the now is it B650? I believe it's B650, right?
Correct.
So they've already announced the B650 motherboard series, which, let's be honest, wouldn't really make a lot of sense pairing that with like a $500, $600 CPU. So you'd think that at least there will be some lower cost parts. Now, whether they're $100 or $300, who knows? But I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a 5600X equivalent. So we'll see. All right, that wraps up our Q&A series for June. Lots of great questions as always. Thanks to everyone that asked them to us in the YouTube community tab and also in our Discord chat for our Patreon and Floatplane members. Always appreciate you guys jumping in and helping us out for these Q&A episodes. What else?
Well, we do have hub clips now.
Hub clips.
We didn't mention
definitely.
that at the start.
Yes. So if you're interested, we do take the super interesting questions from the Q&A sessions that we do on the channel and make separate videos for some of those questions over on the Hub Clips channel. So if you're ever trying to find one of the topics that we've talked about in a Q&A, or you want each of the questions in a separate video so you can pick and choose the ones that you want to listen to, the Hub Clips channel is for you. So we've been operating that channel for what, a couple of months now?
Yep.
It's sort of, we'll put links somewhere so you can go find that if you're interested in the Clips channel. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff over there. Well worth a subscribe, and you'll be helping us out if you do. So that's the Hub Clips.
Definitely. And other than
channel.
that, we have Floatplane, Patreon, the usual stuff there.
Yep.
You guys probably know the spiel there, but we have an awesome Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&As, behind the scenes content, a lot of cool stuff there. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. But if not, perfectly fine.
I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
See you next time.